Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be harvesting some potatoes. These I planted in the middle of April, and now it's beginning of July, July 3rd, and they're ready to come out. Let's get into it. These potatoes here are an early variety called Yukon Gold. They're a large, buttery potato with a pretty thin skin that are great for just really anything. They're a great potato to make French fries out of, but they're also a great dinner potato. Um, let's get into it. So first, I'm going to start by just pulling up all the plants. We'll get a few potatoes, but most of them will come after digging back through the bed and pulling out all the ones that I missed. The way you know potatoes are ready to harvest is the tops here have all died back. You can see these potatoes to my left here are still all green. They're still growing. If I harvest them now, they'll probably not be as many and not be as large as they could be. But these here, they're done growing for the season. If I leave them any longer, they're more likely to be eaten. Chipmunks or voles digging around in the soil for the potatoes. But me, I want them for myself, so I'm gonna harvest them today. There's a nice one. Good first potato. Oh man, this might be the biggest potato I've ever grown. Well, I'm gonna bring these inside for dinner tonight. Swing back in and get the rest of them. All right, brought those potatoes in. Let's keep looking. All right, now that I've gotten most of the potatoes out that I could with my hands, I'm gonna go back through with a shovel and try to get the remaining ones. I don't think there should be too many left. I try to get as many out as I can first so I don't risk cutting them with the shovel. After that, they don't store well. I'll put them in the refrigerator for a few weeks, but then after that, they'll start going bad. These potatoes that are undamaged will stay good for a lot longer. All right, there's this year's potatoes. That's a pretty good haul. A few things that I've learned this year. One, planting potatoes further apart is a good idea. I've always tried to cram in more potatoes than I should in this small space. But by planting fewer plants but further apart, we get fewer potatoes overall, but all the potatoes are much larger. They're much more usable size than a really small potato that are harder to work with. And two, by adding a lot of organic matter in the form of compost and perlite, it allows the soil to stay really nice and loose over the course of the whole year, so that then now I can harvest them with my hands, which makes it easier, and two, it allows the potatoes to really swell up to their full potential, not being compacted under heavy layers of clay. Also, by adding the compost, it allows the soil to retain a lot of water, which is very good for thirsty plants like potatoes. Let's get these potatoes washed up and inside, and I'll show you what I'll be planting in this bed for the rest of summer. Now that we got the potatoes out, it's time to plant the squash. Squash are very thirsty plants and need a lot of water, so it's good to have them in a spot that's easy to drag the hose out to, or a spot that sprinkler would hit pretty well. And two, they're very nutrient hungry. Squash are very large plants and with very large fruits. So now that I've taken the potatoes out, before I plant the squash, I'm going to put some extra fertilizer into this bed, make sure that squash has enough nutrients it needs to get to its full size and productivity. Got some fertilizer. This is just an all-purpose Espoma organic fertilizer. I've had good luck with it before, so I'm going to just keep doing it. Just sprinkle this into the bed. It's not too scientific. Don't have a perfect method to it, but just add it to the bed and the squash's roots will fan out through here to get their nutrients in their water. Some more potatoes still left in the soil. Now, just in the middle of the bed here, I'm gonna put 3 to 4 seeds. Squash plants do well in small groups, and for this size bed, that'll be a good amount, 3 to 4. If you plant too many in too small of a space, they're more likely to get disease, reduced airflow in between the plants, and then just proximity and competing for nutrients can really weaken the health of your squash plants. So make sure you don't plant too many. Now, to make sure these get off to a good start, let's give them a whole bunch of water. Make sure they get germinating well. In order to maximize the space I have in these few raised beds, I have to plant successively. So first, in this bed was broccoli. I planted it in mid-March, and then when that came out, it was time to plant these green beans. These green beans will produce throughout the rest of the summer, and then the fall it'll be time for either more broccoli or lettuce or some other cool weather crop. This allows to maximize the soil and never leaving it bare for any part of the year. By planting 2 different types of potatoes at the same time, these are ready to harvest first and these will be ready to harvest later. So by the time we finish eating through at least most of these potatoes, this other kind will be ready to eat and ready to harvest a little bit down the road, saving pantry space. If both of these potatoes were ready to be harvested at the same time, I wouldn't have anywhere to store them all. Then also, after these potatoes are done, I'll be putting in more green beans into this bed like that I have over there. Same thing, if I had 2 beds full of green beans planted at the same time, it would be way too many green beans and it would take hours to pick them all. But by staggering the harvest, I get to spread out my green beans over the much longer course of the summer as opposed to just the beginning or just the end. By successively planting the crops in the garden and keeping the soil always occupied, it really maximizes the amount of vegetable produce you can get out of these gardens than what you'd normally expect in just a few small raised beds. It's about efficiency and getting your money's worth out of the garden. It's the same thing I've done with my tomatoes and onions here. These onions I planted mid-April, and they're going to be almost ready to be harvested in the next few weeks or so. Now that it's finally getting hot, the tomatoes will be climbing up these trellises and filling that space. So even though, yes, I'm having both at the same time, these onions will be occupying the space that would have been left empty if I had just saved this space for the tomatoes. When these onions are ready to go, the tomatoes will fill in that space. Last year, I planted pumpkins on this trellis here real early in the spring. But then by mid-July, about right now, we were already harvesting pumpkins, which was way too early in the season for Halloween, which was my goal. So this year, I planted carrots, which are already getting ready to harvest now, and then I'll plant the pumpkins afterwards to delay them a little bit so that we get them in time for Halloween. These carrots have been awesome so far. That's a good looking carrot right there. Now that these onions are starting to get done, they got just a few more weeks like my ones underneath the tomato trellis, I'm going to be planting some plants that are good for pollination, so things like zinnias and marigolds, so that hopefully once these pumpkins, after the carrots are out, start to bloom, there's already a good swarm of pollinators, butterflies, flies, hoverflies, and bees out here to pollinate all these crops. Well, that's all I have for today. If you learned something, make sure to leave a like, and if you have any questions, leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.